Good evening and welcome to the 330th meeting of the New York Comics and Picture Story Symposium. This is a weekly lecture series on comics, illustration, animation, and the history of text and image work. The series is sponsored in part by the Will and Ann Eisner Family Foundation. And our guest tonight is Dan Zettwoch. Dan is a cartoonist, information designer, and printmaker born in Louisville, Kentucky, now living and working in St. Louis, Missouri. In addition to many self-published zines and handcrafted mini comics, his books include BIRDSEYE BristOe from Drawn and Quarterly, Amazing Facts and Beyond from Uncivilized Books, and science comics, Cars, Engines That Move You from First Second. His illustrations and diagrams have also been seen in the Missouri History Museum, the State Capitol Museum, and in homemade screenprints commemorating local birds, baseball, and strange foods. I remember including a very strange strip that Dan did about the plastic lids for takeout coffee cups in the Best American Comics back in 2017. And that was a really impressive strip. And his talk tonight is entitled Cutaway Comics and Other Schematic Devices. So take it away, Dan.
Thanks, Ben. It's awesome to be here. I'm a big fan of the symposium, and yeah, thanks everybody for coming. Yeah, I'm going to be showing a bunch of my work, some of my comics, and some of my my sort of other professional careers, an information designer, sort of technical renderer. And I'm going to be showing a bunch of kind of historical work and some work that's just kind of inspired and informed as part of my practice. So I'm trying to move through pretty quickly. I've got a bunch of stuff here, but hopefully it's fun. This first page, this sort of title slide, is a 2-page spread from a comic I did in the anthology Kramer's Ergot years ago about a church youth group that was on a field trip to a cave, and they're traveling this rusty old school bus. It's sort of a ticking time bomb. And yeah, I'm using the cutaway form here as a way to sort of, give you a sense of kind of possible impending doom. But yeah, so this is an example of the cutaway, the sort of drawing technology I'm diving into tonight. Going back, these are probably regarded as some of the earliest cutaway drawings that we have on record. These are paintings from cave shelters on the northern coast of Australia. Getting technical, you might not refer to these as cutaways. You might refer to these as X-ray images or something like that, where we're seeing, the insides of local animals and fish. This is a kangaroo, and the digestive tract of a crocodile down here. But the cool part about these, this rock art tradition in Australia, is that it's been going on continuously for thousands of years. So you see the art actually evolve and start to incorporate things like ships, trading ships from Asia and Europe that started to arrive. And you can actually see they said sort of a X-ray drawing of one of those ships there in the lower right-hand corner. So yeah, that's, maybe an X-ray, and I'll draw a distinction between sort of the X-ray style image and the cutaway. I'll get to that. Yeah, this is the first X-ray on the left here by Röntgen, which terrified people. This X-ray of his wife's hand with her wedding ring floating in midair. And this is a drawing from my book, BIRDSEYE BRISTOE, where he's gotten a mysterious blood blister. He's trying to figure out where it came from. But true cutaways really was sort of a product of the early Renaissance, right? Where we at least still have record of mechanical drawings like this, where people are sort of starting to design mechanical contraptions and boats and, sort of devices for warfare. This guy is, if you sort of Google cutaway or get a book about the history of mechanical drawing, this is the guy who's usually referred to as the inventor, not just the cutaway, but the kind of modern mechanical diagram. They call him Takola, which I think is a word for crow or a nickname. I don't know how he got that nickname, but these are pages from his books on engines and on machines. You can see there's sort of various ways of pumping water, right? All these early diagrams, you know, people were obsessed with water. There's also a kind of a strange design for a one-man centaur costume over here that he designed. I don't know if that was ever actually built. But yeah, this guy's known for inventing or popularizing at least the cutaway and its sort of its relatives, the transparent drawing and also the exploded diagram. It's sort of a slightly different type of drawing. So the guy who kind of picked up the torch from Taccola is this guy, another Italian Renaissance engineer and architect. His name's Francesco Di Giorgio Martini. And he was really into, this is when grain mills become a big thing, right? Grain mills and water mills and processing that. So this is a page from his notebooks. I love this page because you sort of see the entire contraption he's designing on the left, and you see these sort of 4 inset panels, or there's sort of 4 cutaways revealing the 4 important parts of his process, including a horse which walks on the top of this treadmill to power it, which is, I don't know if, again, if this was a practical design or sort of a fantastical design, but I like this side on the right because it looks like a comic. It actually looks kind of like a Ben Catcher comic. Put some word bubbles in there. Continuing moving forward, you know, and as actual engineering and construction is getting better and kind of methods of printmaking are getting better, we start to see these woodcuts of more elaborate industrial practices. Mining becomes important once people learn that they can, you know, get this valuable stuff out of the earth. So instead of just pumping water, they're, you know, trying to figure out how to extract metal. This is a woodcut on the left by this guy, Agricola. I don't know if that's his real name. I think that is also a pseudonym. But yeah, and he had a famous book called De Re Metallica that was popular for like 500 years, and people were still using sort of his designs for mines all the way into the late 20th century. And in fact, the sort of first big English translation of this book was by a couple of young geologists named Lou Henry Hoover and her husband, Herbert Hoover, who would later become president of the United States. So if anybody ever asks you a trivia question about which president wrote the book on Metallica, now you know. This is a drawing that I did. This is one of my first professional freelance projects when I graduated art school. Again, it's also still about pumping water and jets of water and moving fluids from place to place. This is a rendering of a real life hot tub I did by visiting a factory here in St. Louis and seeing it in various stages of construction. My first job out of college was at this infographics firm that was called Explain, as in the word explain, but without the E on the front, so just Explain, very 1998 job. And it was a great job because it was being creative, but it was also sort of learning things and learning how to assemble these sort of images, which as a kid, I might've thought it was magic how to do this, but you learn Adobe Illustrator and it's not super complicated. But as I kind of quit that job and started being more serious about my comics and my other illustration, those same ideas, found their way into my personal work too. This is a comic I did about hot tubs in a weekly comic strip I had for a while in our local Alt Weekly, the Riverfront Times, that I did with another St. Louis cartoonist, Kevin Huizinga, with sort of a Ripley's Believe It or Not kind of comic. This is our character, Leon Beyond, here in the hot tub. But yeah, back to the sort of history of the Cutaway. At one point I discovered this book, which was it was an entire book of wood engravings telling the entire story of the gospel entirely in these sort of primarily pictorial wood engravings. It's by a guy named Nadal, who was an early Jesuit guy. I think he was born in Spain, but this is sort of regarded as the first sort of mostly pictorial telling of this part of the Bible. You can see here, this is like the birth of Jesus and seeing inside the little grotto cave that he was born in. And fast forwarding much further, this is him after he's been, this is him pondering the underworld. But the interesting part about these is that they're sort of like gospel infographics in a way. Like, the cave itself is sort of a cutaway, but then if you look down here in the lower right-hand corner of this one, you can sort of see, it's like a little angel sort of informing souls in limbo about the birth of Jesus, which is interesting. So yeah, these are actual cutaways into rock, right? And this is kind of the beginning of what we see as the importance of caves and all of this, caves and cavern systems and stone being cut away. A similar thing happens, this is the same series, this engraving on the left of the end of Jesus' life after he's been crucified and entombed in this kind of rocky gravesite here. This is after he's been in there for a couple days, and Mary Magdalene and a different Mary show up to, you know, rub spices on his body. I think it's called the myrrh. They're called the myrrh bearers. But they, you know, this is where they show up, and an angel has rolled the stone away, revealing the tomb to be empty. Sort of an interesting kind of a type of a cutaway, right? That's been like, there's this kind of supernatural element literally creating the cutaway to reveal what's inside, or I guess what's not inside. This trope of the empty tomb is, you know, becomes a huge thing for years in painting and storytelling about this event. There's a couple of little snippets up here on the upper right of kind of Eastern Orthodox style medieval paintings showing the same event. I always think it's interesting, like, that these cutaways they create are so like sort of jagged, like the shape of the cutaways, you know, it looks like they've been just hacked. These openings in the cave have been like hacked away by a maniac or something. In the lower right, this is like a modern, you know, people are still doing drawings of this tomb today. In the lower right, it's more of an architectural computer rendering. I've gotten way too deep in reading about the shape of the disc that was rolled away, because in the Bible it does say rolled away, but everyone basically agrees it was actually a square, like a rectangular rock that was covering. So yeah, if you want to waste some hours, get into that debate. Here's those entire, here's a couple of those entire paintings from later showing that same scene. This one is sort of an old one on the left. You can see what's happening here. And then on the right, this is sort of a modern interpretation, which is fascinating to me. You know, this is sort of there's an entire cottage industry of people repainting these Greek icons, or these Orthodox icons. I think here is, in terms of the cutaway aspect, I think looking at the shape of the actual piece that's been cut away from the tomb here is interesting. It's changed from this jagged shape to this like smooth, organic shape. You know, obviously other changes have been made to the painting here of Mary being inside and the ox and the ass inside being less important. But I think this one on the right is he's creating much more of a womb, you know, this sort of a womb to tomb thing happening here. Which kind of moves us to the next, kind of era later in the Renaissance. And this is a Da Vinci anatomical cutaway here on the left. I think kind of regarded as the first person to kind of accurately portray what the, what the baby inside in utero looks like here. So yeah, anatomical cutaways become a big thing. So yes, Da Vinci on the left, and this is Vesalius on the right, who's sort of known as the father of medical illustration. If you can see in there, what's happening here is he's actually got a sort of a cadaver open, dissecting here on the table in the center of this like crowded amphitheater. And he's sort of like pointing at the cutaway of the body, and everyone's huddled around. He's looking directly back out at us as the viewer. Yeah, medical cutaways have been important for showing the insides of bodies for a long time. This is from an old acupuncture text on the left. This is a totally insane drawing and mysterious drawing on the right that is an old English, sort of a medieval English, from a medieval English book. They just call it the Wound Man. They don't really know the artist of this, but he signed all of his work. Pseudo Galen, who was a Greek physician, so it's presumably was a fan of Galen. And yeah, I can't believe I've never seen this Wound Man on the cover of a heavy metal album or anything. But it made me think of this Cavity Sam over here on the left from the game Operation, right? It's literally like a three-dimensional kind of cutaway figure that's with electrified openings. And then here on the right is a graphic that I did while working at that infographic firm. This was a magazine illustration about how adrenaline works. This is the kind of work we did there, where it was sometimes kind of technical rendering, but we always tried to make it more like technical comics or something. we're visualizing adrenaline as these little guys with hard hats, like breaking out of a glass container when needed, the effect that it has on your body. We're into the, into the 1800s now. So I'm sort of building toward uses of cutaways as comics, and kind of in a more narrative or sequential way. So that's why I kind of pulled a few kind of classic scientific images here. This is Fleming's first description of the process of cell division up here on the top. This is a comparison of the human eye with the newfangled, with the camera on the left. And this is the process of a chick being born, growing and being born inside of an egg here. The egg, I think, is the egg cracking is a kind of an important thing for the concept of a cutaway, because it's like something about that fragile, delicate exterior being cracked open and revealing this inside. You know, it was used a lot by Bosch. You see a lot of like eggs with little people inside of them in his paintings. And like the idea of an egg cracking open makes me think of these sort of images. These are promotional materials by a Hollow Earth Society, sort of late 1800s fringe group called the Khorasan Unity Movement. And they believe that we live on the inside of the earth. So their entire kind of worldview is sort of a cutaway. This is a banner of theirs on the upper left, which I like because it seems like the kind of shape of the cutaway edge there is like a person's profile, which is interesting. I don't know that I've seen that in any other cutaways. I also like their catchy tagline of "We live inside, drop in and see us." So yeah, I don't know if there's any Khorasans still with us. I think they moved their whole society to Florida at some point. I don't know if there's any left. But this, this idea of something cracking open also, I think, gets at this idea of cracking a book open, right? Just to crack a book open to read a book, and like is a book a cutaway, right? Is it like is a cutaway necessarily destructive, or is it more like opening to reveal something? Since I was a kid, I've been into this idea of like these hollowed out books for hiding things. Also a fascinating thing to look up on the internet of famous cases of radios in wartime and firearms and things being smuggled in books. It's usually flasks, but this is a piece of a comic I did where you can see here that our neighborhood club, my little dorky neighborhood friends had, just called the Bad Birds. We did this with books. We just hid like secret codes and cassette tapes and wrestling bubblegum cards inside of it. This is a part of a strip from a mini comic I made called Schematic Comics, which are all sort of comics that were autobiographical, but also sort of used languages of diagrams and science and cutaways. Some more sort of deep historical images. These actually predate the Renaissance stuff, because these are Turkish drawings made by an amazing guy named Al-Jazari, who was a kind of an engineer, and he was like a court magician for the rulers at that time, and sort of a builder of novelties and toys. He did like so many of these designs for these sort of strange machines and contraptions. This is one here where he's using water to power this little cow, like a little cow figurine, just like spins around in a circle. So it's sort of a toy, but maybe it's also like actually meant to be a functional pump or something. And obviously, this is pre sort of the invention of perspective. So his stuff all has a very flat, kind of two-dimensional schematic feel to it. There's like up here in the upper right is a boat. Seeing inside, it's like a musical boat. Like somehow the spinning gear activates notes in these machines that play music. This piece down in the lower right is an automaton. This guy is also referred to as sort of the father of robotics, because he did all these designs for these automatons that would do things like pour pitchers of water or whistle or play music. Again, it's like unknown how much of this stuff was ever actually sort of attempted to be built. I think modern folks have tried to like take his designs and actually build some of this stuff. This is an interesting to find all of his work, because all of his work, like you can see the face on this robot, even the face has been like smeared off, and people think that's because the stuff was all like seized during the iconoclasm, when you couldn't like draw people's faces, and so they like destroyed like the faces and the drawings. but thankfully the rest, the machine parts survived mostly intact. So yeah, this stuff gives me, this stuff I think has a strong relationship to things like whirligigs, like that's what they suggest to me, kind of mechanically and visually. I think there's a strong relationship. I put a little Rube Goldberg machine up here in the upper right, because I think there's something about the a mechanical diagram that moves in this flattened perspective, and pieces lead directly one thing to another, sort of by their interlocking nature. Reminds me a lot of Rube Goldberg, and here's a panel from another comic of mine from Schematic Comics. My grandfather's had a whirligig collection that he built, and this was one that he built called Making Bacon. It's part of a whole comic about how my grandpa built these whirligigs, and one time he accidentally cut a couple of his fingers off, but he turned out to be fine. Oh yeah, the other important part of this piece is the how these things actually work. So this guy's also, in addition to robotics and other stuff, he's known for inventing the crankshaft, which was, how we convert rotary motion into linear motion and vice versa. So he's, without him, we wouldn't have things like the internal combustion engine and the crankshaft. This is a page from that book that Ben mentioned. This is a book I did as part of a line of science comics for sort of younger readers about the history of the engine and the history of the car and the history of the internal combustion engine. So there's a cutaway I did of a piston and in the cylinder and how it connects to the crankshaft and all that stuff. Another historical image here. This is again, sticking with the theme of moving water around. This is an early public toilet. This is a French wood engraving. I like this image because to me it reads like a 3-panel comic, sort of like the stall on the left, the door is closed, and then the door is open, and then there's no door at all, and someone has used the restroom, and now they got to, leads you off the page, and someone else has got to figure out what to do with the waste that's removed here. I had a similar series of illustrations in this museum exhibit. I illustrated a few years ago about 1875 St. Louis, the sort of what the city was like in 1875 St. Louis. This is how the water system worked. On the left, we have these giant water towers that are still around town, and they were, essentially like gravity pumps for pumping water around the city. And then, the water was still very, very filthy. And over here on the right, we also had an architectural marvel, like the 3-story outhouse. So I did a drawing of that. And these were huge wall-sized illustrations that I had as part of this exhibit. There's a couple of cutaways that became, very important kind of politically and culturally in the 19th century, late 18th century. This is the patent diagram for the Eli Whitney's cotton gin on the left, which of course, I guess was a wonderful invention for mechanical purposes, but, it made cotton farming so profitable for plantation owners that it greatly increased their demand for land and enslaved labor. So that kind of had a kind of an explosive effect on that problem, which, necessitated this. This is a diagram on the right, or sort of a cross-section rendering of a slave ship, the Brooks slave ship, which is an English ship. This image was started to be circulated by abolitionists in the 1800s as a major sort of rallying point to reveal the horrors of the Middle Passage. Ships ended up being sort of the primary use of cutaways for a long time, because sort of before cars and even before skyscrapers and large buildings. But these huge ships, people they were trying to sell tickets on these huge ships in the late 1800s and early 1900s. So the language of the cutaway, the sort of cutaway that could reveal all these different rooms and how the mechanics worked and the sort of comfort and luxury that one of these ships could provide you on your transatlantic voyage. You started to see these in basically every major publication. There's I read a really fascinating paper by a historian named Shauna Ross, and her paper, let's see, I wrote it down here. It's called Ocean Liner Cutaways, Diagrams, and Composites. Technical illustration is mass aesthetic and popular mechanics in the Illustrated London News. Yeah, it talks a lot about how you were sort of exciting people about spending their money on these things. These were like big 4-page foldouts, and they were sort of early advertorials masquerading as kind of technical education. And then here on the left is, this is the Titanic actually, and this is a cross section of the Titanic that was published in Scientific American shortly after it crashed as part of kind of an expose, sort of a forensic account of how badly designed it was and how like the boilers and the bulkheads were poorly positioned and led to the sinking. So it's interesting to start to think about cutaways as being, you know, sort of journalistic. This image on the right, which is an interesting image, sort of a real life cutaway. This was of a different ship that crashed the year before the Titanic, but it kind of has become like one of these images that circulates around on every conspiracy theory website about how the Titanic didn't actually sink. But yeah, I think it's just, looks like a real cutaway with some little guys standing there and seeing some machinery poking out. And, you know, it kind of reminds you that like the cutaway as a graphic device is actually sort of a destructive, you know, a destructive thing. Like how many of these ships or houses or anatomical, like can these people be put back together? Yeah, I did a book called Ironclad that was also about 19th century ships. This is a 2-page spread from, yeah. My comic showing was a battle between the Hampton Roads, the Monitor versus the Merrimack. Yeah, and then in the 20th century, you know, as we get sort of glossy, or, you know, glossy and pulpy magazines, these types of images start to get more fantastic, right? This is a futuristic ocean liner. Both the kind of style of the ship and the style of the cutaways is evolving at this point. You know, this is your Popular Mechanics and your Boys Life magazines. You know, this is sort of you might call this the golden age of the cutaway. If you do any sort of a internet search, you'll find thousands of these, you know, Gizmodo top 100 mind-blowing cutaways. But, you know, something about the like fantastic appeal of these sort of futuristic Marvel element. So actually trying to find where the first cutaways or where cutaways started to appear in actual comics led me to this magazine, Eagle magazine, which was a British comics magazine in the 50s and 60s. It'd have these center spreads that would be like half real life cutaway and then half comic strip. These are fun to look at because you know, your mind wants to like put these two things in the same universe, but this Ferrari Testarossa is not going to appear in this French Foreign Legion comic, no matter how much you wanted to. Yeah, car culture becomes a big user of the cutaway, hot rod magazines and that kind of thing. Mostly just wanted to show this picture of Rex Burnett, king of the hot rod cutaway. Wish I could say that was me or that I draw that large. I do not draw that large. Here's a couple of car cutaways I've done. This was from that same book. This is from my cars book. There's a whole sequence of different systems of the cars. I'm using a dorky minivan instead of sweet hot rods. This is a page from Nickelodeon Comics magazine that I did that was printed in 3D about a family who lives in a monster truck. Special thanks to 3D master Ray Zone for turning that into 3D for me. Kids' picture books use this sort of form of the cutaway a lot, which you might describe as more of a dollhouse kind of aesthetic, more of a, like just one side of a building gets pulled away to kind of show the rooms as panels or as the rooms as pieces. I don't think these panels necessarily have to be read in any certain order or sequentially, but lovely images. You still see this all the time in kids' books and in comics. And so yeah, cutaways in comics. Yeah, I'm finally getting to the name of the lecture. You started to see this kind of thing a lot in Silver Age comics, like superhero comics. Every kind of superhero group or character who had a secret life needed to live in like a high-tech lair with you know, equipment and secret passageways and entrances and all that stuff. You see, we've got the bat lair here. I'm not sure where this Egyptian manga Sphinx comes from, but it's awesome. I think this panel on the left, lower left, is not actually, I think that's from a 90s comic by Alan Moore that was sort of an homage to Silver Age comics. We had like this cutaway of the Mount Rushmore. This is more of the like type of comics I was into growing up. I was not really a superhero kid, but I loved Mad Magazine. And this is a truly gross comic and punchline by Don Martin. But yeah, real life cutaway here. I guess more of a pull away. And I'm sure there were cutaways in Spy versus Spy and other parts of Mad Magazine, but yeah, I should dig around for more of those. I think there was probably some, I think there's other comics in the 70s, or I think there was a Crumb comic where he was like showing the effect of getting stoned or something, where it was sort of cutaways. I love this. It's a Mad Magazine cover that's got a cutaway on it. It's the Wally Wood drawing of a basketball flying through space, which is just such a strange joke and cover to me, because it's clearly a you know, it's like a reference to Sputnik, right? Who I guess Sputnik was probably described as the size of a basketball. But the joke here is that there's just a basketball flying through space, and it's a very like straightforward, just like cutaway of a basketball with its rubber cover and cord winding. There's like not really even any jokes. I guess the joke is just that like sort of a meta joke about scientific propaganda, or like gee whiz science and its real world implications or something. But yeah, that, you know, that yeah, the Sputnik thing and the space race thing led to like sort of another boom in cutaways, where we start to get a lot of this sort of stuff. This is an underground bunker for the Titan II missile launch complex. I think it's out in Arizona. I'm not sure how much of it is still there, but you know, it's just kind of that blending of that sort of gee whiz futuristic popular mechanics stuff with real life, like potential kind of horrible things happening. This is a nuclear reactor in Wales. It's kind of like a beautiful rendering. It's like sort of sheer eye candy, but you know, balancing that with the potential horrors of it, it's sort of wild. So yeah, no, I've mentioned caves a couple times. And yeah, these last couple images are sort of cave-like. Caves are obviously a big user of the cutaway, because it's really the only way to show them. You know, overhead maps don't do them justice, or any other sort of thing. So you sort of need these strange cutaways of tunnels snaking around in darkness. This is a Mammoth Cave, which is an hour away from Louisville, where I grew up, and we would go every year on a field trip to this cave, and I would see these maps and these like brochures they would give you, and these like for some reason were really scary to me. Like the little passageways look so tiny, and I was probably a nascent kind of claustrophobic, but they just seemed like they could crumple or fall apart at any time. I did a similar sort of a thing in that same comic with the school bus going on a field trip. This is the cave they end up at. It's very similar, very much based on Mammoth Cave. And there's a lot of text. I used to put a lot of text in these comics too. Yeah, more cutaways in comics. You probably, of course, think of Chris Ware, who, you know, uses a ton of these, especially in building stories. You see a lot of architectural and kind of medical cutaways of the main character. I really like this one, which is the first page of one of the Rusty Brown chapters that came in its own little hardcover. Just this thing of like zooming in this cold neighborhood, this like cold, snowy neighborhood, and zooming into this sort of warm cutaway of his like room in the attic. Also like kind of hints at that same command center idea that was big with the pulps or those old comics. Here's a couple of comics by a cartoonist I like a lot, Lauren Weinstein, two very different comics. This is from her book, Goddess of War on the left, the head cave, home of the Goddess of War here. And then on the right is one of her normal person strips, which ran ran in the Village Voice. This is that, yeah, there's a twofer here, because this is the cave model of the cutaway, and then also the in utero model. It's a really funny comic. This is a Mark Bell. This is a spread from a Mark Bell comic. This is in the Gonsfield from 2003, I guess. Yeah, Mark Bell's a cartoonist who does a lot of cutaways of these sort of imagined worlds and little creatures that inhabit them and move around through them. I'd have to look it up, but he might have invented the term man cave here with this strip. Yeah, there's the whole cave, you know, I'm sure there's a ton more of these, well, there's just a ton more cutaways you could find in general. I don't have an exhaustive list here, but the cave dungeon crawling kind of pipeline there's a ton from Gary Panner through Fort Thunder, and lots of other cartoonists have done these same kind of map-like cutaways. I think this is my last example, but this is an awesome comic by one of my buddy and a local St. Louis cartoonist named Ted May, who I actually worked with at that company X-Plane I was talking about. There was a point in which Ted and Kevin Huizinga and I, and actually pretty much every cartoonist who lived in St. Louis worked at this agency. We sort of got all of our friends' jobs, you know, getting paid to do infographics. But I think working on these isometric renderings all the time kind of worked their way into all of our comics. But this is a hilarious comic about this space station. There's a lot more to it. This was in the huge Kramers. So if you ever see one of those, find the strip and read the whole thing. Cradle of Frankenstein by Ted May. So fairly recently, I put together this sort of short series of comics called Cutaway Comics. I had sort of plans to do a bunch of different stories all just called Cutaway Comics. This is one that's about the naturalist and bird painter, John James Audubon, who was also sort of a Louisville guy. I went to John James Audubon Elementary School, so he's always been kind of on my mind. But I read a big biography of him one time, and there was this one little story about him that he got obsessed with this giant sycamore tree outside of Louisville, and he had a hunch that there was like a massive colony of what he called the American swifts, what we now call chimney swifts, lived inside of this giant dead sycamore tree on the outskirts of town. So he sort of took it upon himself to try and figure it out. And he tried a bunch of things first. He tried climbing the tree and sort of examining it from every possible outside way, sticking long branches into different openings and kind of probing it. And the only way he eventually figured out he was going to have to actually cut a hole into this tree and climb up the inside of it, which he did. So here's the scene where he's hired a guy to come and the big axe to chop a hole in this tree. I've always thought this was a funny idea, and I can't believe I haven't seen it. I'm sure it has happened where you have one of these cutaway renderings in a comic or a drawing, and then you see a little person, like a little version of the cartoonist with a little saw, like sawing it out, or one of the characters. So this was my version of that, of actually showing the cutaway, getting cut away. This is what's revealed inside, basically just a solid wall of bird poop and feathers and stuff. So he seals the cutaway back up for a while. We learn about some other stuff. This is a diagram, a cutaway of the Swift itself, and sort of how its digestive system works. It's a tiny John James Audubon sort of traveling through, learning about it from the inside. And then after a while, he gets it cleared out enough to where he can actually climb up in this tree, which is, as far as I can tell, is very honestly and autobiographical, the thing that he did. So he is climbing up the tree inside. And here he is stuffing as many birds as he can into his clothes to try and count them and figure it out. There's a lot more to the comics. But if you ever wanted to read an intense sort of vignette about a guy who was absolutely nuts about collecting birds, look up those comics. So yeah, that kind of brings me to the end of my examples here. I have one more. It's a final self-portrait of me on my couch with my cat in my recliner. Sadly, I don't have that cat or that recliner anymore, but 2 new cats and lots of other things. So yeah, I felt like I flew through that. So I'm happy to back up to chat about anything else or talk more or answer questions.
Sure. If you have a question, just drop your name in the chat and where you can unmute yourself and ask a question. So a cutaway has to be contained by the spatial dimensions of the thing, as opposed to like a schematic diagram where it's just spread out, more like an exploded.
Right. It's an exploded diagram, of course, would be literally things have been pulled apart into space with dotted lines and totally separated. And then there's a cross section, which in my mind is slightly different from a cutaway, in which a cross section is you're taking a flat, a planar slice off of something. And a schematic to me is essentially anything. A schematic is anything that has marks that pertain to invisible items, right? Arrows or dotted lines or motion lines in a comic.
Yeah, I mean, I was thinking of an electronic schematic diagram,
right?
Just this like a flow chart, basically, that shows you how something works.
Yeah, I think
But
that
it's not, right, it's not contained spatially in any way.
I think a schematic's primary function is to like show how things fit together. Same with the explode diagram, whereas I think a Cutaway's main, I think its main goal is to sort of show the relationship of the outside of something to the inside of something.
Yeah.
So there's this sort of a spatial.
Yeah. There's a question from Andrew. I think, is it Andrew Field or Cook who had that question? Field, right, okay.
Yeah. Thank you. I love that presentation. It was fascinating.
Oh, thanks.
I was thinking my background is in like sort of poetry and novels and stuff like that. And it's interesting that there's no equivalent of the cutaway in like language literature, meaning like if you read a poem, it's language, and the language can kind of give you access to an imagined image. But the cutaway seems fascinating because it seems so unique to the visual and visual storytelling. Like even the sort of you said the word slice, and I was thinking of the word shear. Mm-hmm. Like it's like, you know, these cutaways are sort of like shearing away a sort of panel, and then you see a kind of inside world. You know, whether that's like the sort of anatomy of a body or like the sort of interior of a house. But I just found it interesting. I just found it interesting that seems very particular to graphic storytelling or even visual storytelling, because language doesn't have that capacity to sort of show us a sort of.
Yeah, I wonder if I'd be curious to hear from other writers or poets that might think that there are ways to do that. I don't know, through just the words themselves or the formatting of a poem, or, you know, like some sort of, I don't think there's a clear equivalent, but I mean, I think there are probably ways to feel like you're pushing in and then coming back out maybe. Film, of course, has like the term cutaway in film has like a very different meaning, right? A cutaway in film is where you like cut away to a different scene or a different like shot. It's much more of a like abrupt sort of separate movement to something else. But, interesting point.
There was a question from Tatiana.
Yeah, I just, so I guess I thought of another one is, I wonder if you could talk about your fascination. There must be a psychological thing of like wanting to pull away the mask or pull away the veneer of reality and just show really what's going on. Like this man in his lazy boy chair, you know, really underneath is this other thing going on. And then just the technical aspect of how you even do the research on reference images, or how to actually put it all in place so it has the proper perspective, so that we immediately understand all the different planes of where everything is.
Yeah, no, totally. I mean, the psychological aspect is, I feel very driven by that in all of my comics work. I mean, that's sort of like, I have a deep need to sort of like understand the world, kind of. I often feel mystified by the world and like how things work. I come from a family of like very like handy mechanical people, and that's not me. Like, so this is my way of like, oh, this is like, okay, how does an engine work? Like, how does this connect to this? So on like a fundamental level, I do have a need to learn how the world works and like maybe, I don't know, present that to others. I don't really think of it as like teaching others, but I feel of like, oh, okay, there's like, this is a way of describing how the world works, kind of. The research part of it, sometimes I'm like very interested in the research. Like when I did the book about cars, you know, I really wanted, you know, this book was about like really talking about the history of engines and how they work. And this is like a very locked down, good model. So I studied and researched a lot. And thankfully cars are like a very, you know, big part of our society and culture, obviously. So it's easy to research and find, you know, you can go down to your local mechanic at the garage and he's happy to like open one of these up and show it to you. So the research on that is easy, where it's, you know, things like, you know, more fantastic things or more things deep in history, or, you know, even the human body for a layperson is hard to sort of have access to. But it varies. Sometimes I do totally made up, silly silly cutaways that, yeah, that I invest a little on the research, but more in sort of the imagination. Thanks.
There's a question from Michael Dooley. Hi, Michael.
Oh, yeah. It's a show and tell question, so I included some links in there. But basically, the bottom line to the question is, when I saw your Schematic comics cover, I immediately flashed on Charles Spencer Anderson graphics that were happening at the back in the 1980s, and I was wondering if you were familiar with that designer.
No, the name doesn't ring a bell. But if I look at these links, what are some? Did he have a famous like piece he worked on, or?
Well, let's see. The one of the links is not that well known, but it is for. It's actually a poster for Seinfeld. So there's the generation. But basically, big picture, Anderson is someone who spends quite a bit of time. His whole aesthetic has to do with the 1950s discarded clip art images and transferring them contemporarily and putting them alive that way. So that's why I was wondering if you happen to be familiar with, if not Anderson specifically, at least that aesthetic. But yeah, it looks like not.
Yeah.
I'll look that up.
I'll share that. I'll share that.
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
I so you can take a look at it.
I put two.
Wait, I think you have to stop sharing.
Yeah, I put two links in there.
Wait. Okay.
Oh.
Maybe now I can do it.
Will you be sharing them, or should I? Or
yeah, I'm trying to do it, but it's not.
Oh, okay, go ahead.
I can't do it for some reason.
Yeah, maybe I can.
I don't know why. Oh wait, maybe now. No, I can't for some reason.
I didn't mean it for it to be this much work. So
it's weird. I don't know why it's not letting me.
Yeah,
well,
well,
want to try opening one of those, Dan?
Yeah, it's in the chat.
Yeah, I've got them up on mine. I can share it.
Yeah. I'm looking at the off-air image to see what's another one. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, yeah, that's the Seinfeld, and then the other one was something that he put together for a talk he was giving at the Pacific Design Center out here in LA, and but yeah, the one that he's holding up, the off-air, that's basically, yeah, I was just sort of wondering, beyond the cutaways, if there was any particular inspiration for that schematic cover.
Yeah, I mean, looking at those, I love those because I just love the authority of those old, I mean, you call them clip art, but those were like, those are sort of beautifully drawn schematic, like just the craft that was involved in like drawing those schematics in in those early days before computers made it so easy that, they were, yeah, no, I love that. Yeah, the authority of those images is great. And that's why they work as, collage elements and to be ripe for appropriating.
Yeah, he became quite famous and probably rich because this was back in the days when they were starting to digitize and sell artwork. And basically what he'd be doing is he'd just scanning in all these public domain images and digitizing them, like turning them to Illustrator files. And it's like suddenly everybody wanted to become him and that sort of thing. But yeah.
Thanks.
So there's that. Anyway, that's it. But somebody mentioned there's a printmaking aesthetic in Dan's work for sure. So yeah, that's kind of similar takeaway to what I was getting. Particularly in that comics cover. Anyway, thank you. Yeah, I really enjoyed this presentation, or I'm still enjoying it, in fact.
There's a comment or a question from Glynis. Are you there, Glynis? No.
I'm seeing it. She's asking about archaeological cutaways. Yeah, I was sort of getting at that with those, with those empty tomb drawings. Yeah, that's a, it's a way of recreating, I guess, attempting to recreate the past faithfully, right? I'm sure that the artistry is sort of second in those cases to really trying to, with the evidence available, the like archaeological record of rebuilding those things, which is, so much of it is buried. It's literally has to be a cutaway to show a lot of it, right? Is that what you're asking, Glennis?
Yeah, more of just commenting on that's how I've ever drawn cutaways that's been reconstructing ancient buildings or place. Yeah, the relationship of like building, cutaway being destruction versus like creating, because like in some way a cutaway is like taking something apart, whereas if you're doing like building something from scratch or even building a model, it's sort of like the opposite. But if you meet halfway, right, like the destruction of something halfway and the like building of something halfway could be the same drawing, right? Right.
Yeah. Do you know the famous cow with a glass window in its side where you could actually look in and watch it digest grass?
No.
Someone, I think they really did that. I don't know how the cow lived, but there is.
Wait a minute. When is an actual living cow?
Yeah, that was the idea. You could look through like in an ant farm into the cow's digestive system.
I'm gonna have to look that up.
It's a real cutaway, yeah, a living cutaway.
A living cutaway.
Yeah, right, because
you see that with like animatronics or robots or like Mr. Goodbody with this like suit with all the biology painted on it, right? But real life cow.
So I mean, there are cutaways that show you things that are impossible to see, and then there are cutaways where you could go into the door and look at the room. It's not impossible to enter the cutaway.
Yeah, and in fact, so most of this presentation is just stuff that I've collected over the years and put in a folder on my desktop, but I did feel like I needed to do some like, what are the earliest cutaways? And, there's a whole era of medieval painting where they would do this thing where they weren't actually cutaways. They would just like very carefully position every window and door to like show something interesting. And it's like, is that a cutaway? I don't know. They're just very, very windows that are just placed in a really nice position.
Right. Yeah, there's a question from Summer.
Hi, Dan.
Hey.
One of the things that I find really interesting about your work, there's definitely I feel a lot of nostalgia from it. The cutaways that I experience from your work is, I think we're of a similar vintage, shall I say, and I recognize a lot of cutaways from like childhood textbooks from the 80s and possibly even 70s. I see a lot of that as aesthetics. But what I find really what you are sort of original with this cutaway, not just for the design work that you do, but how you use it as a narrative in your work and your storytelling. And I use it like, I love comics that use lists, and you do a lot of listing, you do a lot of, you even use recipes as a way to, like in BIRDSEYE BRISTOE, like I'd love to hear more how it informs your narrative and how you tell stories, because it feels like such a thing you do, like it's just driving through all of your work.
Well, thanks. Yeah, I don't know how much of it has to do with just stuff I loved reading as a kid versus, I had this job where I was like doing it for a living kind of. I don't know if it's just sort of like my own sort of weird philosophy of comics where I have that narcissistic thing where I want someone to read my comics as slow as possible. So that's why I pack it with density and different types of information in different formats, versus the like fast, smooth, clean read or something. I don't know if it's part of how I sort of want to build worlds in comics, or the stories I'm telling are like 3-dimensionals and 4-dimensionals, and yeah, it's you know, and it's like, I'm sure it's a lot of it becomes, you know, on the verge of being gimmicky, or is gimmicky a lot, right? That's like a kind of a danger of that kind of whiz bang, like popular mechanics thing all the time. But you know, I have to like have fun making my comics. That's why I make them. So hopefully they're fun to read.
No, it's beautiful. It's really, and I think it's your signature. I wouldn't say it's gimmicky. I think it's your signature, and it's a form of originality, but you always know it's your work, you know. But I mean, just like in the way that you do like the Audubon, which I love that comic so much, and the bird, I love that you showed that illustration, because it's such a perfect example of how you use it as a narrative, because it's Audubon discovering the inside of his obsession with that bird, but it's your obsession with drawing every nuance and every bone and every inside, and then your main character is going inside that bird, you know. It's just like, it's you as a storyteller, and that's the thing about being a cartoonist, is that you are a storyteller and you're doing it visually, and it's just such a specific way to do it, and it's amazing.
Well, thanks.
Yeah.
Anybody else? Bob Sikoriak has a question.
Hey, Dan. This is great.
Thank you.
I'm so glad I got to make it. I wanted to show one that I was thinking of that I'm sure everyone's seen, but I just love the Family Circus dotted line comics that actually have, they're schematic and have cutaways and are narrative. It's like,
yeah, those are some of my all-time favorites growing up. Of course, I didn't like Family Circus except for when there was one of those.
Sure. It's the only time you like rose to a real challenge.
Right.
But what are you working on now?
Let's see, I'm working on, so I have another one of these science comics coming out. This one's about bridges, which is a little bit unfortunate as a cutaway lover, because bridges are like, they're a form where all the sort of skeleton and all the insides are already on the outside. So I didn't actually get to draw many cutaways of the bridges, but that's coming out this summer. I'm working on another one of these mini comics. Let's see, I did this mini comic a few years ago that my dad wrote about working at the phone company in the 70s called Telltales. And they're printed on these these microfiche things that my dad rescued from the phone company in the 80s. And so this is, you know, it's a lot of like phone company stuff. So it's a lot of strange machines that like you can't even find reference for on the internet, because they're who took pictures of phone company infrastructure. So I'm working on issue number 2 of that. Yeah, all the rest of my usual stuff.
Thanks for doing this.
Yeah, great. Thanks for coming.
It's interesting that, wait, so these are called cutoffs?
Cutaways is what
cutaways.
Yeah.
Because then, like, what were the? Because like, what did it didn't cutaways? Because then there's cutouts, right? Like Matisse did cut.
Those are actual like cutout paintings, like cutouts, right?
Cutaways and cutouts, and they're all like sort of different.
They're related. I'm fascinated, and I don't know if this came across in the like all the different cutaways I was showing, but I'm fascinated by like the shape of the cutaway and actually how it looked like it was cut away, right? Because sometimes they're perfect squares. Sometimes they look like someone had a really sharp X-Acto knife and like cut away a nice, you know, parallelogram or something. But then other times it looks like, you know, oftentimes with bricks, it'll look like they were smashed out by the Kool-Aid man or something. It'll be this crazy like brick, you know, and other times they look like, you know, smooth, like, right. So yeah, even the shapes of cutaways and the thickness of the material, right? Like that's another aspect of the cutaway, is that you're trying to give a sense of the material a thing is made of. It's like an egg versus a side of a brick building versus a, you know, submarine that has crashed in a iceberg. Yeah.
I have this book I'm going to show you. I think I showed you this, Dan, when it's the best cross sections ever. It's amazing, and it has like, this is like the newspaper, you know, it's like, this is a entire cross section of like all the, you know.
Is that, Kevin, is that BSD, Stephen BSD?
Yes, BSD.
Yeah. He's the cross-section guy. So he has a bunch of those books, and that's again one of the cross-sections are weird because it really is like he goes yeah.
Digestives.
Right. Those become like so I mean those are so detailed that they're kind of overwhelming.
With ships.
Yeah.
Anyways.
I don't know if there's enough money in publishing for 2 cross-section guys. He beat me to it. I'm the Cutaway comics guy.
And cross-section just means you cut away, but then you pull things apart as well.
Yeah, I think that's how he does it. I mean, to me, a cutaway is a little more interesting because you're investigating the contour of a thing versus like just slicing it through. I know that seems like a very subtle distinction, but to me, it like is almost a totally different like visual effect. You know what I mean? It's like
Yeah.
It's like instead of revealing, it's more like, you know, samurai swording or whatever.
Yeah.
Well, you always seem to maintain the whole spatial environment. I mean, there are those biological cross sections that are just slices of a body. You know, the 2-dimensional. They reduce it to a 2-dimensional. Thing,
right.
So that's a big difference.
There was a book that came out a couple of years ago that was like, it was called Cutaways, and I was like, oh, awesome, a Cutaways book. But on the cover was just like a log cut through it, this like solid mass of a log, and I was like, there's no interior space represented in this. It's not even a cutaway on the cover of this book.
Yeah, just right. They're not right. So there's another question from Tatiana. If you want to ask that.
Oh yeah, I think I might have just answered that. The attraction of the cutaway versus the cross section.
Yeah, and I think listening to you, there almost feels like more of a psychological thing on what you're trying to do. Like you want to show the outside skin, but you want to show the inside. While a cross section isn't doing that, and that you actually are so in tune with the flesh part, you know, and the thickness of it, and the texture on the outside versus the inside. I think that there's so much to think about, and I did never think about this difference, that you're really into the cutaway versus other things.
I think it's true. Yeah.
And also it might have to do with like what Summer was talking about with directing the narrative of the drawing, like directing how you perceive something in terms of how you tell the story of an image. So that makes it so interesting, and that you're making a deliberate composition of the elements you're working with.
Yeah, I think that's true.
Yeah.
There's sometimes when your cutaways are like part of the narrative of the linear plot, and then there's other times like that Kramer story with the bus and the cave, where it seems like there's like this free floating consciousness that's like it's like digressions of descriptions that are just like, you know, just showing you something because they can, or just because like the consciousness is so restless that it just wants to look here, and it wants to look under this, and it wants to look under that. But
it's like the point of view of the story, right? It's like an omniscient narrator versus like a character imagining a cutaway. That's why I like those. It's kind of like why I really like those orthodox icons where it'll be like someone actually pointing to the cutaway, right? Like I just like that, you know, because that's sort of what we are as an artist, as a cartoonist. We're like, look at this thing I'm drawing for you. Here it is. I'm pointing at it. I'm like literally lighting up this area or cutting this area away for you to look at it, right?
There's a good book of literary criticism that was published a couple of years ago, and it's called The Secret Lives of Puppets. But it's about, it's about a lot of things, and mainly about how sort of the supernatural is secularized in our culture. And so like we sort of get our transcendental through TV and art, but in sort of a weird, like indirect ways. And she talks a lot about the importance of the image of the cave or the grotto, which I thought you were mentioning, Dan. as like a sort of symbol for sort of weird rumblings of the supernatural and like sort of interesting things like that. But it was a fascinating book. I don't know. I mean, I don't know if that's kind of something related to the inner and the outer, or the, you know, appearance and reality, or I mean, I don't know.
Sure. Yeah, definitely. So make sure to post a link to that in that book you're talking about in the chat, so I can check that out.
Yeah, I gotta get I'll write the title, and then I gotta get the.
I don't know if we missed somebody. There was some conversations going on in the chat, but I don't know if there were questions.
Yep, thanks.
For Anne.
Yeah, some more cutaway versus cross section. I like the comment about how it's like lifting a hood or a veil off versus. I think that's a great comment. Yeah, and X-ray vision. The X-ray vision thing is interesting in terms of the the destructiveness of this technology, because when X-rays first started, people were just like X-raying themselves left and right and like burning their bodies apart and stuff with radiation. So it's like an interesting, they were like trying to reveal too much.
Right. There's Mark Sobel has a baseball question.
Not exactly, but Dan, I have your Game 6 print. I'm going to show it. I have it hanging right here. But I just wanted you to kind of talk about it, because when Summer was saying about how you tell a story with a single image, this is a great example. And I thought maybe you could kind of tell me a little bit about it, because I look at this all the time.
Sure.
I don't know if it's.
All right, so this is a silk screen print that I made a few years ago. Actually, I guess it's been 10 years ago, of a particularly exciting baseball game when the St. Louis Cardinals won a World Series game in improbable fashion against the Texas Rangers 2011 and won the World Series. But it was a game that like they were really far behind, and they had to all these sort of crazy things had to happen to allow them to come back and win. But yeah, I combined a few different statistical and kind of schematic models in this print, right? There's what they call the win expectancy chart. So there's some math and statistics. This line that goes through the center kind of shows the probability of the Cardinals winning. And then there's little sort of cartoony vignettes of plays throughout the game. And then there's this kind of panorama of the stadium below. So yeah, it's kind of a layering of different types of information.
Yeah, it's fascinating how you use comics, you use mathematics, different design elements to tell like a complete baseball game in one image.
Lots of inside jokes for funny nicknames that Cardinals of 2011 had.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No cutaways though, but you have the stadium.
Yeah, I could have figured out a way to get a cutaway in there. Just a cutaway of the baseball, kind of like that Bollywood cutaway of that basketball. Just a random big close-up of a baseball zooming through space.
One thing I love about this is you just balance all the different elements are so well balanced within the image, and it really does kind of read from left to right, and it tells a whole story in a very kind of unique and interesting way.
Thanks. Yeah. Hopefully the Cardinals have some exciting games this year to draw.
Yeah, well, we can talk about that separately.
Anytime.
Okay. So, I don't see any other questions or comments. So thank you. That was great.
Yeah, thanks everybody for coming. That was yeah. If you have anybody wants to get in touch with me, feel free. Or